Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are.
Welcome to the Books That Make You show. I'm your host, Desiree Duffy, and we are talking about elevating stories through podcasting. That's right. We're taking a new spin on our topic because as story lovers and as writers, we have a lot of possibilities when it comes to podcasting today, from narratives to interview formats, documentaries, educational formats. Well, the world of podcasting has revolutionized the way we tell stories. So authors, listen up, as you just might find yourself wanting to launch your own podcast after hearing from our guest today, Dave Campbell from True Media Solutions. And he is the host and producer of several different podcasts, and he helps others to create their own. And quite frankly, even if you're not a writer or an author, and Dave interviews a lot of them, just knowing, because if you're a professional or maybe you're a hobbyist and you want to start your own podcast, there are so many different applications and so much that we can learn from our guest today. Dave, welcome to the show.
It is awesome to be here. I've been really looking forward to this. When I saw this on my calendar this morning, I was thrilled to be here. So thanks for letting me come on.
You're like, hey, I'm going to turn the tables now because you host so many different podcasts and you are often the one being the interviewer. So now we're switching things around. And I want to get into your story. But first, can we talk about, just give us the lay of the land with podcasting? How has it changed the way we consume stories?
I think podcasting is one of the most personal ways to communicate with an audience and to build relationships with a listener. I love the idea that nobody knows what you're listening to. You have your earphones on, you're on the train, you're on the bus, you're on walking your dog, and you could be listening to Ariana Grande, or you could be listening to something that makes you better as a human, listening to great stories told by great people. And I find it probably the most interactive and personal way of communication. And I'm all in on podcasting and I love it.
What do you say to folks? I mean, podcasting kind of came on the scene several years ago now. It's been around for a while. This is not something new. And I hear a lot of folks who will say things like, oh, that's so passe. Or it's going to take too much for me to build up my podcast. What do you say to the naysayers?
I'm finding people are looking for genuine human connection. And there are a lot of different things out there that entertain you, but you never really get to interact with the person that's in your ears that you're listening to or watching online. And the moment that you can reach out to that person and they respond to you and you can build a relationship with them, it is like the coolest thing ever, that you can have time in this person's calendar and spend time with them and talk to them and build that relationship. You don't get that in other traditional media. You can't reach out to somebody on Netflix and have a conversation with your favorite movie star or television star, but you can reach out to somebody in a podcast. And these people are really accommodating and they really want to connect with you as a listener. So I love that bond, and you can't break that bond. It's amazing.
It reminds me, because I'm a radio gal from way back in the days, and actually this show, some folks right now are listening on mystar95.com, and some people are listening, whether it's iTunes. They have so many different platforms nowadays for us to get our podcasts from. Plus YouTube, we have the video element. And I think what you're saying really digs into the core of it, because back in the days of radio, when I was first learning to be a host, one of the things that was conveyed to me is that you're talking one-on-one with that person. It's not like you're on a stage per se saying, hello, all you people out there in radio land. It's personal. And it's theater of the mind, because when you're talking in somebody's head, you start emulating some of their thought processes. And that can be really powerful. Thoughts on just that intimacy, because I think that's such a great point that you're making.
I love the fact that a listener or a viewer of your podcast they get to identify with you and they get to learn your little quirks. They get to learn a little bit of your backstory. They feel like they know you. They feel like they could walk up to you at a conference or at a coffee shop and just walk up to your table and go, I'm a listener of your show. I know everything about you and you don't know who they are. It's a really interesting dynamic, but there's a connection there. There's a perceived relationship that happens through your audience. And that's something that we can develop over time. And I actually had people reach out to me for my show with very little expectation that I would ever respond to their email or their voice message. And when I do, they're just like blown away. They're like, I can't believe he responded. I didn't think he would. But that's the beauty of this, is you can build that kind of relationship. And it's so rewarding to have that.
Yeah, people think, and there are shows out there are hosts out there, and you're one of them. You're doing so magnificently with all of your shows and everything that you do. But there's still almost like that perceived that idea that this person is like a rock star. They're not going to talk to me, but to your point, that communication a lot of times is so much more intimate and personal and acceptable. I'm curious, Dave, can we find out more about you? Tell us how you became a podcaster. Tell us why you do this.
I fell into the podcasting space when a lot of other people did. We had a lot of time on our hands back in the day, a few years ago. We were all on pause. I had just opened a small business, opened a storefront with my wife. And 4 weeks after we had our grand opening, we had to close our store. And I had to go back to work because we weren't allowed to be open during that time of life. And it was really tough. But we had a worldwide community that actually bought our products and services. So we wanted a way to reach out to them. So we created our first podcast together, and it kind of snowballed from there. And I've slipped down this very slippery slope into podcasting, and now I can't get out. I have 8 different shows, and they're all different, and I love them all. They're all my little children. And it's just amazing that the connections you can have with people. It goes back to connections for me in everything that I do in podcasting. I just love the idea that you can do this and be able to talk to the world, not just your local community, which I love, but someone can press play on my podcast in Warsaw, Poland, and listen to my show. It is the best thing ever.
And again, I just think back, once upon a time in radio, your signal only went as far as your signal went. That was it. Like, you were in this small little market. Maybe you had 6,000 watts to deal with, or 25,000. Ooh, you were so big. But I think you're right. You can reach folks around the world in ways that are just unprecedented in our times. So I'm curious. I know you can't pick favorites because you've got 8 children as your podcast. But I do know that you interview authors, and that's kind of how we connected. Can you tell us what you like best about speaking to authors about their books?
Yeah, on my Living the Next Chapter podcast, I get a chance to be curious with authors. As a reader, the opportunity for me to talk to an author and to unpack what happens behind the scenes with an author and how they got to where they are, I find it fascinating to hear their stories. And for any author that's listening, people are curious as to who you are and how you got to this part. They see a book on a shelf somewhere, but they don't understand how it even works, how that book got there and how it was written and where the inspiration came from. And to hear the story behind the story, I think it gives you a different level of appreciation for the book they're holding in their hands. And I want to build that bridge between authors and readers. At the same time, I also want to encourage new authors who are on the early stages of their journey as an author and learn from somebody who's published, learn from somebody who's got to the finish line. And what did they learn along the way? How can we help somebody who's just starting today? They have 5 words on a piece of paper. They've just started. But imagine if you could listen to over 450 authors and hear their individual stories about how they succeeded as an author. A lot of people start, but not everybody finishes their book. So here are a group of people from children to seniors who have actually done the thing that you're starting to do as a new author. I find it inspirational, encouraging, and it's a chance for that author to celebrate those in their community that want to be like them someday. And as well, to speak to their community that supports them as an author and to give them the platform to say thank you to their community that buys their books, leaves reviews, and supports them as an author. It's a great opportunity to present that platform to them. And I'm just there to facilitate and get out of the way. Ask questions, lead the conversation, but it's really all about my guest in every single episode. I'm not an author to date, but I get to entertain these authors and entertain the conversation to benefit them and the audience. I love it.
That's the great thing about books, right? They cover everything. So it's like this one medium, but it can be a self-help book. It can be fiction. It can be nonfiction. It can be memoir. It can be true crime. It can be children's books. It can be so many things. So now you as the host got this myriad of different topics, and it's just a different, that's the same methodology that they've used, but with all of their different stories and ideas and things. I'm curious too, because as someone who helps authors get on shows, get on podcasts, what advice or thoughts do you have for the author who might be getting prepared or thinking about going on a show? What would you tell them about being on podcasts and getting ready to share their messages with the world?
I think our listening audience and viewing audience loves a great story. They're there for more than just the facts around how you did the book, how you wrote the book, and what the book is about. I want people to come and buy an author's book. That's the main idea of my show. So the whole idea about coming on and selling people on your book, I want you to do that. I want you to promote your book, but I want to talk about the stories behind the scenes. And again, how did you get there? How did the idea come for this book? Where should we start reading? What is your favorite part of this book? One of the questions I did on an interview just before meeting with you today, I interviewed an author and I asked him, for your fictional book, the main character, if that main character was able to walk into the room right now and sit down with you, what is one question that you don't know the answer to of the character that you created in this book? And the author looks off in the distance and goes, I've never thought of that before. Like, I created this character, and you can see them thinking, they're like, you know what? I don't know the answer to this question. And they sit up straight and they're like, I would be fascinated to know from my main character. And then they state the question they don't know the answer to. And it sparks them to think differently about what they've written. And the fact that they don't even know their character fully, and in that moment, it makes them rethink and go, you know what? I love that question because now I have to think. And I just love doing that because as a reader, you just anticipate that the author knows everything about their characters, but sometimes they don't. And it's fascinating to them to know that the author is still processing a book that's been printed, it's on the shelf, but they still have this dream and love for their characters. I love bringing that out in conversation.
I love that story too. That whole idea of just taking something and thinking differently. And you can explore that in podcasts. That's the thing too. Right now, I mean, we are doing an interview style podcast. There's lots of those out there. There's also narrative types. In true crime, for example, true crime, think of Dr. Death, for example.
Right.
That started as a podcast, very narrative. And then it became a Netflix show because underneath, story is story is story. These are just different ways, whether it's a book or a podcast or a series. Any thoughts on that for people who are like, oh, no. I could never do a podcast. I must do my book. I mean, does it make sense for people to be creative and maybe explore telling their stories through podcasts?
There's a little misnomer around podcasting that if you start a show, you're committed to that show for the end of time. Like you're going to be podcasting every week, all the time, forever. You can do a short run podcast, 5-10 episodes. Talk about your book, talk about your journey. I would encourage an author that's starting a journey of writing their book to podcast at the same time. Take your audience through the process of writing chapter by chapter and kind of use the podcast as a kind of a sounding board and a writing tool to help you write your book. And do it in real time. Bring me along as a listener and then celebrate with me when the book is launched. I've been with you the whole time. You've written 12 chapters. There's 12 episodes. And you've walked me through the process of writing your book. I will buy your book just by taking me through the journey. I love when an author can explain it and take me behind the scenes. We love those shows. How is it made? How is this done? It's so interesting to kind of see how these things are brought to life. An author can definitely leverage a podcast just to bring people along on the journey. It's a great idea.
Yeah, I work with some of those authors too. We put together the book fest twice a year, and I'll reach out to an author who I want them as part of the book fest to join us because, yes, they've written great books. I'm not saying that's not part of it, but they've also become a teacher. They're helping other authors learn about craft and characterization and storytelling and all its different ways. And you can do that with so many different things, right? If you're a plumber, you could start a podcast about how to be the best plumber. Like there's no exclusions when it comes to this because so many people out there have that love of learning. But some people out there, we've all heard the stories of like the people in the health and wellness sphere who aren't necessarily what they seem, or people out there who are spreading misinformation. Any thoughts about some of the bad actors who are out there maybe degrading what podcasting is?
I think maybe some of it goes back to the fact that it's not instant success when you start a podcast, record 2 episodes and you're podcast famous. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes to build an audience, to build community, to get better at your craft. I can't imagine sitting down to write a book and writing a bestseller on my first attempt. I don't think I could do that. I don't think I could pull that off. Somebody might be able to, but it's definitely not me. And I would take time. It would take time for me to learn how to write and do it well. I'm going to have to go do practice. I'm going to have to go seek expert help. I'm going to have to do research. I'm going to have to practice. I'm going to have to write a bunch of stuff and throw a lot of it away. I'm going to just have to repeat and repeat and repeat until I feel like I'm getting better. And in podcasting, it's kind of the same thing. You don't just buy a microphone and now you're famous because you've recorded an episode. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes. You're a great example of that in what you do. It takes effort. It takes time. It takes a team for some people who can do the things that we can't do on our own. So you have to be aware of your limitations and your strengths, and then be really realistic with yourself in the journey. And don't set your expectations too high, because if you don't meet that goal, you might stop and you might get frustrated. You might give up too early. Anybody that's listening to this and thinking that you have an idea for a show, I just want you to know there is no one else in this world that can do your podcast. There is no one else who knows people you know, have been to the schools you've been to, read the books you've written, and have read yourself. You are your own person, and nobody can duplicate you. There are people who are hungry for your insight, your wisdom, your knowledge, and your tone, who you are, how you show up in this world. Nobody can duplicate you. There could be 100 different podcasts that talk about the exact same topic that you talk about, but nobody can do it like you can. So we need you in podcasting. We need your voice. And I don't see anything that points to podcasting is going away anytime soon. If anything, I'm seeing there's a gap in podcasting where we need more people to step up and help and create new shows. So it's not too late. If you're thinking, oh, there's too many shows out there, there's not a lot of active shows. There's a lot of shows that have stopped producing episodes long ago. But as far as active, consistently releasing episodes, it's not as many as you think. So there's a lot of room for you in podcasting.
Yeah, especially if you can explore that niche and offer something to folks that they might not have expected. I do know, I mean, we've seen it. It's almost heartbreaking. The shows or the people who they're just going for clicks, right? They're just going for views and they start to get sensational. And I think those authentic, real voices for the people who really want to learn and explore, I think that's so valuable. And as far as building audiences, like you're talking about, yeah, it takes time. But do you have any tips or suggestions? How do you build an audience? What are some of the things that you should do from the get-go so that you can build up as you grow?
One thing you said near the beginning of our conversation was that we need to talk to one person. And I love that you said that, because that's something we need to do. I think podcast growth happens when you address one person at a time and build your community over time. If you can build a solid relationship with a listener, then do that. I'm a big fan of celebrating the small things in life. When you have 1, 2, 5 listeners that listen to your show, it's very easy for you to somehow track them down, get information from them, and have a conversation with them. If you had 100,000 people listening to your show, it's very hard to have a meaningful conversation with 100,000 people. It's hard to do. But when you have 5 people who come to your show on a regular basis, there are ways for you to get voice messages from them or call them out because you see them in your analytics and your stats. You can say, "Hey, Boston, I see you in my stats. Thanks for listening." And Boston replies. They'll send you a message. Thanks for the shout out. You can build a relationship. So I love building one at a time. And I podcast for the audience of 1. I'm happy with 1 listen. I don't see that as a failure. I see that as a success. That somebody picked my show over anything else they could do in life and in their day. They took time to listen to my show. I see that as a win. Where a lot of people would see that as it's not really as good as it should be. I think it's a great stat when 1 person picks your show. So I'm happy with that.
I've also seen the opposite, folks that find that huge platform and suddenly they have 100,000 views and subscribers are going through the roof. They got the really cool YouTube placard behind them
Right.
and they're rocking it. And I've actually seen them come on the air going, "I'm burnt out.
Right.
I can't keep doing this. I appreciate you all." Because then they realize, to your point, you need an editor. You need somebody uploading. You need promotions. You might need to set up a Patreon or buy me a cup of coffee, different things that go into it that feed that. And you mentioned something too. You have the calling function for your shows. What are some of those ancillary things people might be doing so that they're building up some of those revenue streams? Do you suggest using Patreon or other apps for that?
So I love engagement tools that bring my audience into my world and make it as super easy for them as possible. So one of them is my SpeakPipe, which is at speakpipe.com. They have a free plan. You get like 90-second recording time. And you can put on your website, people can leave you a voice message. And what I like to do is bring the voice message into my podcast. So people are listening to the show, and then all of a sudden, there's some new voice on the show, and it's a question from the audience, which I can answer on the show. And it increases that engagement piece. And in the short time I've had my SpeakPipe, I'm like 300 messages have come into the show from listeners around the world, which is crazy. I love it. It's just so great. And you get an email and you have no idea what it is. You press play. It's like Christmas morning every time. I love it. It's great. Another engagement play for me is my Buy Me a Coffee. Very simple to set up, but it's a way for people who maybe can't commit to a monthly fee on a Patreon, for example, but want to say thank you. And to buy a $5 cup of coffee through that Buy Me a Coffee website is something that's an easy thing for them to do. It doesn't cost them a lot of money. It's a simple thing, and they can do it again and again if they want, but it's a way for them to say thank you. And what I do with that money is I reinvest it back into the podcasting space. So when I get a new podcaster that comes to me and says, "I want to start a show," I walk them through all these steps. I encourage them to set up a Buy Me a Coffee and a SpeakPipe. And I tell them, I want to be your very first voice message, and I want to be your very first donation. I want you to see what that feels like, to get those emails to come into your inbox and go, "Wow, this really works. Like it works. Like I'm doing the thing." And I want to do that. So I've been able to do great things with the gifts that have come from my audience and reinvest them into other people. That's what I love about it.
I love that you do that. And I love your approach to it. It's very much like a donation or a tip, an appreciation. I've seen on the flip side as somebody who puts authors on other podcasts, and it's growing. It's that pay for play model. Back in the radio days, it was called payola. And it's basically somebody approaching you to be on their podcast and then charging you exorbitant fees up front. And I really need to make it clear when somebody's like, "Hey, can you kind of help us out so we can grow?" I support that 100% because I see all the work and I know all the work that goes into it, producing and putting together a show. But what are your thoughts on some of the pay for play folks who are out there charging hundreds upfront, if not thousands of dollars to people who might be new to the world of podcasting and want to be a guest on shows and want to get their book out there?
The big piece that I think is missing in that is that it's not disclosed to the listening audience that that's what's happening. And the audience has no clue that somebody has paid to be on this show. And I think you kind of need to disclose that because it's kind of a commercial in that sense. Somebody paid to be on the show, where the majority of shows don't require that. So if you feel like you have to do that, you really don't. So just ask that up front, make sure you're clear on that. If you're okay with it, then great, that's fine. But for me, all of my 8 shows, I don't have any pay to play at all. I'm here to serve my guest. I'm here to bring people to them. That's the reason I do my shows.
What kind of shows do you listen to on your free time? I know you're going to say that you listen to author shows and this show and the shows that you've helped set up. But honestly, what do you like to listen to? Because like you said, nobody knows what you're listening to. So,
well, beyond your show, you mean beyond your show? Well, I love anything to do with music. I'm a musician. I've been playing music for years. I love comedy podcasts. I like things that take you away. I do love one show for sure. It's the Mel Robbins podcast. And I love Mel Robbins because she talks to me as a listener. She could have the most famous person on her show as a guest, but she takes time to talk to me. I'm a huge fan of her show because I love how she does what she does. So there's a lot of great examples out there of great podcasts. I just think you need to find the right one. And the best thing about it is if you find a great show, the way we can grow podcasting as a listening audience is to tell somebody about it. That whole word of mouth is the best thing. If I tell my best friend that they should watch this show on Netflix, they're probably more apt to do that because I know them and I know what they like. So they're going to take my recommendation. And in podcasting, if you find a great show like this one and you want to tell people about it, they're most likely to listen to it because they trust you. So if you find something great, tell somebody and point them to it so that we can grow podcasting. I think that's something that all of us can do to help.
Right now, I'm going to point and tell everybody, well, you're going to help me do it, about your shows. So, okay, you've got 8. I don't know if you can name.
Only 8.
Only 8. Can you name them all?
I can. Are you ready?
Uh-huh.
Okay, here we go. Quick, I'll do lightning round. I have a music podcast called the Add to My Playlist podcast, encouraging you to add music to your playlist on Spotify. I have a podcast called Living My Side Hustle. For anybody who does something outside of your 9 to 5, it's a podcast just for you. I have the Upcycle Canada podcast, which is the one I started with my wife, Jennifer. We take things people don't want, and instead of recycling, we upcycle. We turn them into something new. I have the Living the Next Chapter podcast. This is my author podcast, one of my babies that I love a lot, and I get to talk to authors, and it is great. I've had authors as young as 6 years of age and authors as old as 86 on my show. It is amazing. I love it. I have the Dad Space podcast, which is a podcast for dads by dads, because I'm an empty nest dad, 3 adult children out of the house. My wife and I just celebrated our 31st anniversary yesterday, and we're here to talk to dads and encourage men to be better in the home and be a better example. And then I have the How to Podcast series. I teach podcasting because I want more people to be podcasters. And that's a show where I bring on people in the podcast space, and I want people to come and listen to their shows. And I bring you on as a guest co-host. You share your journey, and we point people to your show. So I really love that one. I have the Podcast Editing and Support show. It's a show to help podcasters to find editors and editors to find podcasters. All about how to hire somebody, how to find a great editor for your show. And that's one I just started most recently. And then I have one last show for kids. It's called the Daily Santa Podcast. It's for the month of December, 25 episodes in a row. And it's all to help kids be better humans as we count down to Christmas. Those are the 8.
That is so incredible. Dave, I'm in awe. I really am. And to know that you and your wife too are also business owners and you're doing all of that. And that's such a great variety. Absolutely amazing. As we head out today, any final thoughts for people that are interested in becoming a podcaster? Can they get a hold of you? Should they listen to your shows? Can they hire you as a consultant? How does that work?
Yes, any of these shows I mentioned is all under the banner of my True Media Solutions, which I love the artwork behind you. Thank you for that. TrueMediaSolutions.ca, because I'm in Canada, and there's a list of all the things I do to help podcasters there. And all the shows are listed there as well as some of the podcasts that I also do the editing for as well. So if you're looking for an editor, that's what I do. And my big thing as a takeaway as we leave today is just remember that your story matters, your voice matters, and that there is someone who would love to hear what you have to say. You have a voice, you have an opinion, and you can have a platform through podcasting. And as an author, it is a great way to put evergreen content out into the world. People can press play on your episode long into the future and fall in love with you and what you do. So as authors, I would encourage you to be on a podcast or start a podcast, but get your voice out there through podcasting. I think you'll see a great result on your return on investment.
That was the best outro ever, Dave. Thank you for that. Love it. Thank you for joining us.
Awesome.
And thank you, everybody, for being with us, too, for joining this conversation. I hope that you enjoyed it. You can find out more about us on our website. It's booksthatmakeyou.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I'm on X, and we're also on YouTube. Of course, make sure you subscribe, ring the bell. That way you never miss a great guest like Dave Campbell. Thank you again so much for joining us today. Until next time, all of my bookish buddies, please enjoy all of the books and podcasts that make you who you are.
The host and executive producer of the Books That Make You show is Desiree Duffy. Sound mastering and engineering by Dave Napox. Social media and content promotion by Siddhi Jahagirdar. Copywriting and editing by Mike Robinson. The Books That Make You show is an award-winning podcast produced by Black Chateau Enterprises.